So let's talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to the Persona series. And that's Persona 3 Reload on the Nintendo Switch 2. That's right, I bought both copies of the game. I bought this one when it came out, and then I bought this one on Black Friday for $40 because I do really like this game. The way I see it is it's kind of just like Persona 3, but with a new coat of paint. And while I've beaten Reload on the PS5, I'm just now getting into the Switch 2 version, and I'm noticing some differences, mainly in the frame rate, which is a big thing that people complain about if, we're ignoring this key card thing. I don't like that either, but it was on sale, and I got it for pretty much half the price of what I paid for this when it was new, so I can't complain too much, especially considering that it's portable. Now, the big question here that you might be asking is, if I already have this, why in God's name would I buy the inferior version just to have it portably? Well, that actually is a big reason. It's to have it portably. And you got to understand, as you get older, you have less time for, the things you enjoy doing in life, whether it's video games or reading, whatever you like to do in your free time. And I am no exception. I'm a married man. I work, a full-time job, sometimes a little bit more. I get overtime occasionally. So when I have time to game, I like it to be as convenient as possible, which is why I oftentimes opt for the portable versions or like Switch or Switch 2 versions of things. I even have a Steam Deck because there were a lot of games I wanted to play that were only on PC that I just wanted ease of access. I didn't want to have to boot up my PC, sit down. I wanted to be able to like move rooms if I needed to, or just like pick it up and play 5-10 minutes and then put it right back down. Another reason that I bought the Switch 2 version of this game is because I am a collector. If you couldn't tell, I really like my Switch stuff. I've got some amiibos, I've got, my PlayStation, I've even got some, like, DS and stuff over there, PS2, Wii U, whatever, I got a lot of different gaming stuff. And that's not to mention that I'm, a massive Persona fan. I buy these releases as they come out, and I actually have a couple of these special releases as well for Royal and regular Persona 5. So, of course, it was inevitable that I even actually have a wall scroll back there, too, for Persona. It was inevitable that I was going to buy it at some point or another. I just wasn't expecting it to go on sale so soon. We had the Black Friday sale, so no complaints here, right? All that said, I do still think this is a pretty bad release, and honestly, not the best way to play Persona 3. There are a lot of people that will argue, despite the quality of life of this game not being as good as, like, Persona 3 FES, this is the other accessible version of the game if we're not talking about Reload. And this is a fine way to play the game. There's really not much wrong with it. It's made for the PSP, though, and that definitely shows. It doesn't look as good. Some features are taken away, like you can't walk around in the map outside of dungeons. And the graphical quality took an obvious hit. There are some differences about it that I think are pretty cool, like you can actually control your characters in this version as opposed to FES. Now, I don't own a copy of FES, however, I do have it digitally on my PS3, so if you have access to that version, or don't mind emulating, then I still think that's the best way to experience it for your first time. But I mean, overall, I think this is still a fine way to play the game. I'm like, only 3 hours in, I've noticed some issues like the 30 FPS. There's the fact that this doesn't come bundled with the DLC for some reason. You have to buy that separately. And there's a game key card issue. I don't think it's gone on sale digitally, but if you can find this on sale, I think it's worth picking up. But that's mainly assuming that you haven't played Persona 3 Reload yet. If you have access to a PS5 and you don't mind that it's not portable, definitely go for this version, or even better, the PC if you have access to a PC that can run this with no issues. Because this runs at 30, this runs at 60. Why this runs at 30? I have no clue. That's a big issue, and it is definitely noticeable when playing the game. Now, the way I do these videos is I'm very casual about them. I don't exactly do a ton of research. I'm just like talking about my experience when doing these things. I don't really mess with capturing games. I don't know how any of that works, so I can't exactly show you the differences, but you can look that up on YouTube. It's not really that big of a deal. Like, you literally just look up a YouTube video, do a little research on it, and you can see the differences. Now, the way I see it personally when it comes between the different versions is, like I said, I'm really casual about all of this stuff. I just, Persona's my favorite series. I'm unfortunately one of those people that I'm kind of part of the problem where I'll just buy whatever Atlas puts out when it comes to Persona. I bought Tactica, I bought Strikers, I even bought Dancing All Night back in the day. I don't have it anymore because I wasn't a big fan of it, but I was at least willing to give it a bit of a try. And the way I see Reload is it's just another Persona 3 experience with a new coat of paint, and that is perfectly fine for me. If that's not something you're interested in, if you're totally cool with, just FES or Persona 3 Portable, I mean, you get roughly the same experience. It's just this one, it looks shinier, it looks newer. A lot of people say that, Reload took the soul out of the original Persona 3 releases, and while I don't necessarily agree with that, I totally understand where people are coming from. And that's kind of why I want to tell people to just make your own opinion on these things, try them for yourself. Like I said, the PS5 version, I didn't say it earlier actually, the PS5 version of this game goes on sale all the time. I've seen it as low as $20, I want to say, one time. I've seen it for $25 constantly. Don't buy this game for $70 brand new. Wait for a sale, or even if you're digital, I've seen it go on a deep discount digitally as well. But I'm asking you to probably just form your own opinion if that's possible, because I know a lot of people say that Reload in particular is just irredeemable dog shit. It's bad. It's not worth playing. I've seen people go as far as to say it's, a 1 out of 10 game, and then turn around and call FES a 10 out of 10 just because, oh, my soul, they took all the soul out of my game. And I don't agree with that. I think that's a bit of a ridiculous statement to make. It's a totally fine game. It does some things differently. There are some things about it, it doesn't look as gritty as the original. It really does look super shiny and quite a bit more bright. I don't think they took the soul out of it. They did change up how the cutscenes go. They changed the voice actors, and I think the new voice actors, to their credit, did a really good job, but it's hard to live up to the original cast. Now to the real point of this video, I did want to talk more about the Switch 2 version of this game, and I'm just wondering why, in God's name, it's 30 frames per second. I understand why they did the keycard. It's, it's a popular thing for these devs of the Switch 2 to do, because it's the cheaper option. They don't have to pay for the full card. I know Nintendo only does the one card size of 64 gigabytes. This game is 30 gigabytes, looks like, so they could have fit it on a regular card, but they just chose not to, despite the fact that you have, developers like Supergiant putting Hades 2 on there, and they're an indie developer, right? I believe they're an indie developer. But nope, big old Sega, they just had to go the keycard route, despite the fact that for the Switch 2 version of Sonic, that new racing game, they're putting that on an actual cart, so I don't know why they can't just do that for all of their releases. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It just felt like kind of a rushed port, that they were just hey, go ahead and just throw this on there, and I'm unfortunately thinking they're going to do the same for Persona 4 Rewind whenever that comes out. And honestly, I don't know what system I'm going to get that on, because if it's another situation where it runs like Persona 3 Reload does on the Switch 2, but then it runs it runs well, properly on PS5, then despite the benefits of having portable gaming, to me, I'm probably still going to opt for the PS5 version. Now, to get a bit more into the frame rate of Persona 3 Reload on the Switch 2, I've done a little bit of side-by-side comparing, I played a little bit of the game on my PS5, and then I played a little bit on my Switch 2 to see if I could really notice a difference. And for the most part, no, not until you get into the dungeons at least, and you get into the battles and you see all of those crazy effects going off. Then, in my opinion at least, you can really notice it. But is it a detriment? Personally, no, I don't think it is, at least for me, because it's literally just visual. It doesn't really affect the gameplay. It just looks a little bit slower when you're doing a spell like Agi or Garu or whatever. The effects, it might slow down very, very slightly, but it's not enough to affect my enjoyment of it. And that's partially due to the fact that I grew up playing a lot of games with really dog shit frame rates. I'm totally used to it, and even recently I did play a game, Death End Request 2. I played that on my Switch 1. It runs a lot better on Switch 2 now, but man, let me tell you, on the Switch 1, this game ran like absolute dog shit. It was fucking atrocious, constantly dipping into the single digits for the frame rate. But because I liked the story and I didn't mind the gameplay, I just kind of kept on trudging through it. I don't know if that just means that my standards for gaming is in the gutter, but I do play a lot of different things. I enjoy a lot of different games. I can't remember the last time I played a game and I was just like, this is fucking awful, I don't want to play this anymore. I can usually find at least some enjoyment out of any game that I play, and unless it literally affects the gameplay. Like in this case, it didn't, because again, this Death in Request 2, that's another turn-based game, so it didn't really affect the gameplay. It just affected how you were moving around in the overworld, in the dungeons. But then an example that I like to use when it comes to like frame rate, like growing up, frame rate on games was really hit or miss, and we didn't really have the internet to like widely complain about these things. I mean, we did, but that's not really what people focused on. Like, take a game like Ocarina of Time. I believe on the N64 that actually ran at 20 frames per second, and you see complaints about that now, especially because I believe the 3DS version runs at 60, and it is a very, very noticeable difference, especially with it being an action game. But look at how well received that game was. The frame rate didn't affect much. It was an action game, and it does affect it, but people still loved it. But then when you see stuff like Persona 3 Reload here on the Switch 2, 30 FPS, which I believe personally is the bottom. That's the bare minimum. If you dip below 30, then it starts to affect my enjoyment. Do I think it makes the game bad? No. Far from it. Because to me, unless you're literally like a professional esports player, like, professional like Call of Duty player or something, frame rate past 60 doesn't matter at all. And I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but that's how I feel about it. I feel like it's very trivial. It's just like, whatever. If it gets past 60, like I played Silksong on my Switch too, Hollow Knight Silksong, and that runs at 120 FPS. And I have a monitor specifically that goes up to, I believe, 180. And if you were to tell me that it was 60 FPS, I could not tell you otherwise. I'd be like, sure, I think 60 is like smooth, it looks great, it's what I prefer, but I think 30 is just fine for most games. I think where people get upset with Persona 3 Reload in particular is that it just feels really lazy, feels rushed. It's like, this feels like a Switch 1 game when, why are we having this new hardware? Why are we getting these, current-gen games on the system, and then they're subpar versions of them still? When we see just how far Nintendo has come with their hardware, the Switch 1, great system, man, but it it had some issues with how it ran games. And the Switch 2, we were seeing that we can run some crazy stuff like Cyberpunk. This game runs great. I've had no issues with how this runs on the Switch 2. So why then is a game like Persona 3 having issues with the way that it's running? And I say issues lightly because it's not really issues. It's just they capped it at 30 for some reason. And I'm not going to defend that. That's just like, what are we doing here? And that's not even to mention the biggest issue I have with the Switch 2 release of Persona 3 Reload. And it has nothing to do with the actual game itself, but it has to instead do with the marketing, the advertisements they had for this version specifically of the game. Now, if you know anything about Persona 3, you know that the original game is like almost 20 years old at this point, so spoilers have been out there for a long time. But being as it is now, the original versions of those games aren't exactly accessible, and a lot of people don't really want to play the portable version that was, the PSP release, this one right here. A lot of people don't want to play older games like that. And while I disagree with that sentiment, that's just, unfortunately, how a lot of new gamers are, especially people who haven't had access to those older ones. They're probably not going to want to go back and play them, so they're going to wait for a new shiny version, which is what Reload is. So despite the fact that those spoilers have been out there, people don't really know, that haven't played the game, they don't really know what it's about. Guess what the first thing in the final trailer for Persona 3 Reload on the Switch 2 was? It spoiled the biggest plot twist in the entire game in the first sentence. Now, if you haven't played these games, I am going to mention the spoiler in a little bit, so if you don't want that spoiler, you might want to click off or whatever, because I am going to talk about it. And the spoiler is that it tells you what happens whenever the characters are killing these shadows in the Dark Hour. So the main point of the game is the characters are killing these shadows because they think it's going to end the Dark Hour. When in reality, one of the main characters' fathers, Yukari, died doing research on what was going to happen if you kill these shadows in the Dark Hour. And he found out that killing them was basically going to bring about the apocalypse and bring down Nyx, which ends up being the final boss of the game. They tell you this. This is something that you don't find out until like 60% through the game. But they straight up tell you this in the trailer. The first sentence spoils this plot twist. Not to mention, in the trailer, they're playing the final boss theme, and I'm the kind of person that when I'm playing a game, I like to experience the music as it comes. Especially when it comes to like battle and boss themes and dungeon themes and all that kind of stuff. I like to be surprised. I like to be like, yo, this is a banger, or whatever it might be. I don't like hearing it ahead of time. So they spoil the final boss theme and the biggest plot twist in the game immediately in the final trailer. And all of this stuff put together that I've mentioned just makes this entire release for the Switch 2 super, super cursed. Fortunately, I already knew the story. I already knew the music. I had already played the PS5 version too at that. I've played, 3 different versions of Persona 3 Reload now. I've played FES. I'd never beat it, but I didn't beat the answer, but I beat the main game. I played Portable, and I played Reload. So I knew all of this stuff. But new fans, they didn't know this. So going into it, having that big thing spoiled is just like, it takes a lot of the suspense out of the game. Because the game doesn't really drop a lot of hints. It kind of just like thrusts this on you out of nowhere. So it's not like, it just takes the mystery out of it. And I really hate that about the marketing for this game. All that to say that, like, if you have access to a PS5 and you don't really care about portability, this is always going to be the option that I recommend. Still, again, if you have access to a PS2 or you don't mind emulating, then you could totally do that. Play FES. Not the original. FES is basically like the original, but upgraded with new content. If you only have access to a Switch, this version is totally fine, although it's a bit more bare bones in comparison. The story's all still there. There's voice acting, but there's no cutscenes, and you can't walk around the world like you can in every other version of the game. If you have access to a Switch 2, and you can find this on sale, I do still recommend it. It's a good game. It runs fine. Just keep in mind those issues that I mentioned. But it's fine. It's okay. Just don't pay the full $60. I only paid $40 for this on Black Friday, and I was totally okay paying that because in my mind, I was like, I paid $70 for this, and I thought that was fine, and I basically got it like 40% off in comparison. And that is pretty much it. If you made it this far, I appreciate you listening to my nasally ass voice because I am sick at the moment. I'm doing what I can to combat that. But if you sat through all of this, I really do appreciate you. I would appreciate it if you could drop a like or a subscribe or whatever, or don't. I don't care. I kind of just like engaging with community. So if you have anything to say, if you think the things I said were a bit dumb or ignorant, or if you agree, whatever it might be, feel free to drop a comment. I would love to talk to you guys about this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, thanks for watching, and see ya. Bye.